to our series called Behind the Crime. Today marks 1 year since we started this channel. Behind the Crime is a podcast where we examine real criminal cases through the lens and understanding of psychology and criminology. And I'm your host, Faye.
And I'm Ariel. Today we'll be diving into the chilling case of Menhaz Zaman, a 23-year-old from Markham, Ontario, who went on to murder 4 of his family members in 2019.
Have you ever told a lie? A lie that got bigger and bigger until you didn't know what the truth was anymore.
Most people have. Maybe the lie was about test score or your absences or telling your parents you're going somewhere when you really weren't.
So what happens when that lie continues for years? What happens when those lies become huge? What happens when someone becomes so afraid of the consequences that they see no way out?
Well, that's what happened in today's case.
The case we're looking at today involves family pressure, academic failure, deception, and a tragedy that left 4 loving people dead. But before we talk about the crime, we need to understand who Menhaz Zaman was and the family background.
In the late 90s, a married couple from Bangladesh immigrated to Canada. They had their eldest son in 1996. Soon after, they had another daughter named Melissa in 1998. But we are mainly focused on their son.
The dad was a taxi driver in Toronto, and he was well respected. He received multiple advances for work, which led them to buying 2 properties in Scarborough out for rent, and later led to them moving to Markham. Menhaz grew up normal. His friend gave a description that described him as just an average Markham kid, and he was described to be the family's golden child. Part of that reason was because he was studying engineering at York University, or at least that's what he told everyone.
But he dropped out of school after taking 2 semesters of an engineering program at Seneca. But rather than telling the truth about it, he created lie after lie and stringed his family along the lie.
For years, he was leaving, telling his family that he was going to classes, when in reality, every day, he was spending his time alone, going to the mall and going to the gym.
But the thing about stacking lies and lies upon each other is that eventually those lies become a massive thing that's going to collapse at some point. Imagine carrying that secret every day.
Being the firstborn in an immigrant household, Menhaz felt the pressure from his parents, the pressure to succeed, the pressure to uphold their standards, and that pressure must have been colossal. So let's get into what truly occurred.
The point of collapse was rapidly approaching. Menhaz couldn't stay in college forever, and his supposed graduation day, which was July 28th, 2019, was approaching. There was no way for him to keep that lie any longer. Menhaz began to come up with a plan. He needed to get out of this situation somehow, some way, and after thinking long and hard, he could only come up with one solution.
He told his friend this. Menhaz was fairly active on the server. He would post a lot, and it wasn't strange for him to say things out of pocket. So people often weren't fazed at his comments. He had a history of rude and offensive messages towards Muslim people, even though he was raised in a Muslim household. He often got banned for saying inappropriate things. Now I want you to hold on to that piece of information because it becomes very important.
Then came the day, July 27th. On this day, Menhaz made his move, showing a series of actions that would change the Zaman history forever. He went to his mother's bedroom and struck her over the head with a crowbar, making her unconscious, and afterwards he slit her throat, making sure she was truly dead. Then he went upstairs and did the very same to his grandmother. After his sister Melissa returned home, he proceeded to do the same thing to her and waited until midnight for his dad to come home, and he did the same thing.
And what makes this case even more disturbing is what happened afterwards. After each of the murders, Menhaz communicated with his online friends. He filled them in on what he was doing at every step of the way. At first, his friends didn't take him seriously. I mean, of course, he usually posts messages like this on the thread, so they didn't take him seriously. But one friend thought it looked all too real. And collectively, they took the message seriously and contacted authorities in Canada. Police then arrived at his home and made a horrible discovery.
Menhaz Zaman lived in this two-story home on Castlemore Avenue in Markham with his parents, sister, and grandmother. Now the 23-year-old is accused of the mass murder of 3 women and 1 man found inside the house, presumed to be his family members, after police were called here around 3 Sunday afternoon. Menhaz Zaman was arrested here at the scene.
He's a really good kid. I've seen him grow up, and for me to think why he would do that, it would have to be something very, very traumatic in his life that happened.
While neighbors spent the day trying to understand what went wrong, Zaman was in a Newmarket courtroom wearing a black t-shirt, leg shackles, and handcuffs. 4 family members came to see the accused for themselves, but would not speak to Global News as they left the courthouse. Zaman looked eerily calm during his very brief appearance, saying nothing other than his name and date of birth. The Justice of the Peace then told him he was to have no contact with 13 people, likely relatives. His relaxed demeanor hard to believe, given the seriousness of the charges he's facing. Global News has learned from a member of an online gaming site that Zaman belonged to that he allegedly confessed to killing his family on Sunday during an online chat. Zaman also allegedly shared pictures of his dead family members after the killing and posted pictures of a bloody knife, the suspected murder weapon. All this prompting concerned members of the online group to contact police. The member also shared a post allegedly sent from Menhaz Zaman to the group.
So let's quickly break down the case using the 5 W's, in case anyone is a little confused. Who was involved? Menhaz Zaman, a 23-year-old from Markham. What happened? The murder of 4 family members. When did it happen? July 27th, 2019. Where did it happen? The family's home in Markham. And why?
Well, that's the question we're going to try to answer. But remember, this is only our opinion.
Obviously, we'll never know exactly what was going through Menhaz's mind.
But investigators found that he had been hiding his academic failure from his family for years. He was living 2 different lives. One version of this life existed online, and one existed in front of his family.
The other version was the reality he didn't want to come out. We believe he feared disappointing his family and fearing facing the consequences. And that's where psychology becomes important.
When we researched this case, one of the biggest questions we had was whether he was influenced by nature or nurture. I believe nurture played the bigger role. There was no evidence that shows he was born violent. Instead, we see years of pressure, isolation, and lies building up.
I agree, but I also think it's important to remember that lots of students experience those same pressures and don't commit a crime as big as this one.
That's true, which is why we can't say pressure alone caused the murder. Pressure just helps us explain the situation, but it doesn't explain the choices he made. In fact, lots of students face pressure, and they don't go to actions as grave as his.
What makes this case interesting is that students can relate to a part of it. Many people have experienced a bad grade, failed a test, or felt nervous about disappointing someone. And sometimes people hide those things because they're embarrassed. The difference is that most people eventually tell the truth. Menhaz chose to continue lying, and they became so big that he felt trapped.
Now, I would say he's more of a sociopath. He was calculated, he was organized, he was calm, and he was able to hide his emotions. And he planned the murder thoroughly for 3 whole years.
Improper socialization contributed because growing up he was scared to communicate, and he had a serious fear of disappointing family members. And that played a huge role, and I think deviant behavior played a role in this case, because it caused a harm to others and violated legal and moral standard.
But wait a minute. Now, an interesting connection we made to this case is Jennifer Pan. For anyone unfamiliar with this case, we will explain a brief summary. Jennifer Pan was a young woman from Ontario, which, much like Menhaz, spent years lying to her parents about her education and achievements. She told them she was attending university, earning good grades, when none of it was true.
Eventually, she became trapped by those lies, and instead of admitting the truth, she kept building on the lies. In both cases, the individuals were terrified of disappointing their parents.
Both Jennifer and Menhaz were living double lives. On the outside, they seemed like successful students, and in reality, they were struggling hiding big secrets. This is where the strain theory comes in. Both cases involve people who felt huge pressure to achieve success, and when they couldn't meet that expectation, they turned to deception. But the deception created even more stress.
Although there are big differences in both cases, one of them being that Jennifer arranged for a murder-for-hire plot that targeted her parents, while Menhaz personally murdered his family. But even with those differences, both cases demonstrate how fear of failure and fear of disappointing family members can become incredibly powerful motivators.
When we compare these cases, we're reminded that success isn't the most important thing. And the connection isn't just because they both lied to their parents. The connection between both these cases are connected through strain theory, family expectations, double life, and the psychology behind their decisions.
In an article published by York Region, Dr. Huron Mock states that parents project their own immigrant expectations onto their kids. They can put pressure on the kids to achieve their unfulfilled dreams, the immigrant dream. This pressure can result in children leading double lives so as not to disappoint the parents while maintaining their freedom.
He also states, this can lead to deception and fantasy because ultimately the children don't have a life. They don't have friends, no dating, no sex. It's very strict, almost like a religion. Dr. Gazman notes that in certain parts of the world, there is sort of a social contract between parents and children. The deal is that the parent works hard, 12 hours a day, they take no vacation, and they do this to provide a warm and comfortable house. But for this to be fulfilled, the children are under tremendous pressure to enter university and enter a prestigious program and build a proper future for themselves.
Born in Vietnam to an Indian father, Dr. Ganeshan further explained how feelings of resentment and desperation can fester inside children who often have little opportunity to voice their own opinion. He told the story of a young man he knows of who lied about attending uni only to end up disappearing from his family's life altogether, rather than lose face and admit it.
He added that this sort of pressure can result in educational and career successes, but it can also leave the individual feeling misery during adulthood. Some become high achieving in life, but they're never truly happy. They always have an empty feeling inside. He states, some were born in Canada in a mixed culture where they see freedom of speech at school and a hierarchy rigidity when they get home. There's post-traumatic stress, pressure in the family, social isolation, verbal abuse, and they continuously feel sad and depressed for a long time. And they lack the stability to control their own thoughts, often like Menhaz and Jennifer.
So what can we do to help prevent situations like these from happening again?
Well, one thing we can do is encourage open communication between parents and children, so that when people admit mistakes, they feel safer to admit it and they're less likely to hide it.
We can reduce stigma around failure. We shouldn't make someone feel like failing will ruin their future.
We can also improve access to mental health resources. Students experiencing overwhelming stress should have a support system. We also need to remember that success should never be valued more than a person's well-being.
While these strategies can't guarantee that these tragedies won't happen, they can help create an environment where people feel supported, understood, and able to ask for help before lives become overwhelming.
The Menhaz case is one of the most disturbing murder cases in Canada history. Nothing can excuse the loss of these innocent lives, but studying cases like these can help us understand the factor that may contribute to criminal behavior. It can also help us prevent these criminal behaviors before it gets too big.
By examining the psychological and social influences behind this case, we can better recognize the warning signs and understand the importance of communication and healthy coping strategies.
When we compare Menhaz's case to Jennifer, we see common themes of pressure and fear of failure. The biggest lesson is that no failure is worth sacrificing your mental health over. Asking for help and being honest about your struggles is always a better option than suffering in silence. Thank you for joining us on Behind the Crime, and this was episode 20, Pressure to be Perfect, the case of Menhaz Zaman. I'm your host, Faye.
And I'm your host, Ariel.
Thank you for listening, and remember, understanding behind the crime helps us further understand.